We're going to section 143. Jesus continues teaching in the temple, and we should get 3 sections done today. Jesus continues teaching at the temple. This is a Tuesday, where it starts off with Luke 21. It says, starting verse number 37, "And in the daytime he was teaching in the temple, and at night he went out and abode in the mount that is called the Mount of Olives. And all the people came early in the morning to him in the temple for to hear him." And so this is moving on into Tuesday. It is interesting that with only one teeny tiny question back around Saturday, from the Saturday time period, that there's any question about some of the timing, but this is really fairly clear, and we got some interesting stuff today. So he's continuing teaching at the temple. This is now question 812, and the question is, what did the people do the day before Jesus was to be crucified? And basically from what we had from Luke 21, 37 to 38, the answer that you got is A, they anxiously came to hear more from him. Now, looking at all 3 of these together, they started to lose interest in him, or they started to agree with the Pharisees and other leaders. Okay, so B and C are the opposite of each other. They didn't, no one's more aggravated than the other. They started to lose interest, or they went so far as to go to the Pharisees and other leaders. Well, the people showed no signs of leaning away from Jesus, nor losing interest. If anything, they showed signs of being won over. They showed signs of being won over. This is what makes the situation so ironic. How the people can be so easily won over to just reject him at the instigation of the Pharisees and other leaders defies understanding. Defies understanding. Something, I can't remember who I might have been talking to, but something that I think is very interesting. Let me just say something here. Okay, and I'll wait till they get to that part. But let me just repeat then that they were being more won over, and then really, it's like the next day practically, they're going to be calling for his crucifixion. Okay, so we go to section 144, the consultation with Caiaphas. Consultation with Caiaphas. Now, you might notice let me see, do I have it there? At the top of the scripture reading there, it says, "After 2 days is Passover." This is an interesting phrase. When you go to look at the timing of things, and you're trying to figure out which day Christ was crucified on, you have different languages of chronology that are used. So it says, when after 2 days is Passover, that means after Tuesday and Wednesday. It was inclusive of the day that they were then on. It was Tuesday at that moment, and he's saying after 2 days, meaning after Tuesday and after Wednesday, is the Passover. Okay. It's tricky language. Matthew 26:2 says, "You know that after 2 days is the feast of the Passover." And the feast of is in italics in your scriptures. That means it's not there in the original. It's applied for understanding. And the Son of Man is betrayed to be crucified. Well, this fits in with the scope of a Wednesday night. A Wednesday day crucifixion. The construction of time after 2 days, quote unquote, can sometimes be confusing because the context reveals which days are included. And you have to use the context to figure this out. For example, there is no such thing as 0 AD. Has anybody ever heard of 0 AD? No, you never heard of it. It doesn't exist. There's 1 AD, there's 1 BC, there's no 0 AD, no 0 BC. Okay. Technically, I'm 66 years old, but I am in my 67th year. Okay? And this kind of construction is used in the scriptures, and it can be a little bit confusing. Like in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius is when John the Baptist was doing his ministry. Well, in the 15th year means 14 BC. That's what it means. Because 14 BC marks the 15th year that he was reigning. Not the 15th anniversary of his reign, but the 15th year that he's reigning. He'd finished 14, now he was in his 15th. And that's how you can mark some times. This comes up as a problem when you try to consider when you try to do a harmony of the kings in the Old Testament. I tried to do this one time, and I was getting things weren't matching up. And that's because you had to consider, was it the year of their ascension or was it the anniversary year? And I have a book somewhere that deals with that and lays it all out to explain how it works out. So when we refer to something happening in 1 AD, it's not after a year has passed. It's something that happened after January 1st of 1 AD. And while the day before that would be December 31st, 1 BC. So this is how it works out. So, and this, like I say, this is a common problem when trying to ascertain timing in the scriptures. And you know what makes matters worse? Jesus was born 4 BC. They messed up the time when they went to name it, but the dating system had already stuck, and so really Jesus had been born in 4 BC. 4 years before he came, he was born. Yeah, Brother Tone.
But can we consider Jesus' statement as in the days of, like Jonah, the only sign that I can tell you is that he was 3 days and 3 nights. Is that literal, Pastor?
That will be literal. And in fact, it's because he explicitly says 3 days and 3 nights that we know that he was being actually very careful so that there was no confusion in the matter. One of the things that is used to justify a Good Friday crucifixion is that 3 days, when you say 3 days in the grave, they'll say that is a figure of speech that could mean any part of a day. So if you have Friday night, Friday night, Saturday night, they count that as 3, and so they call that 3 days. But Jesus was very explicit to make sure that it was to be taken literal, that he'd be 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. And of course, that's one of the reasons why we break this down. Now, we want to be, one of the more common reasons why we're concerned is because we don't want to follow a Catholic institution, okay? But more importantly, actually, that we do a Wednesday daytime crucifixion is because it would do despite to the scriptures if we didn't. You would be denying what Jesus just said. You'd be calling Jesus, or you'd be telling Jesus he didn't know what he was talking about. So that's why for that. Okay, so the question is, in 813, list the leaders who wanted to get rid of Jesus. And that'll come from Luke 21, 37 to 30. No, that comes from, I'm sorry. Matthew 26, 3. Okay, then assembled together the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders of the people into the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas. So who were they? Yeah, there you go. Exactly right. There you go. That was easy. Okay, now this demonstrates a wide consensus in the leadership of Israel, which demonstrates that consensus does not necessarily prove something right. Just because people are in agreement, they can be in agreement over the wrong thing. So they all wanted to do that. That consensus is there. Okay. Now, they were all against Jesus Christ, which brings us to question 814. In what ways was Jesus not a rival deserving of death? Matthew 5, 17, 19, he came not to what? Destroy the law. He wasn't against the system of the law. He wasn't a rebel who was trying to prove anything. He's popularly depicted by that since the Marxists have gotten around since the 60s. Matthew 5:20, he promoted what? He promoted righteousness. Matthew 23:3-13, he supported what the Pharisees told people to do, okay, but not their works or hypocrisy. Okay. John 6:15, he rejected being made an earthly king. Okay. Now, this question here speaks to an aspect of human nature. It presents a common problem that no matter how much evidence you give contrary-wise, people will move against you if they have their own agenda. So the priests and others had their own agenda, and so it wouldn't matter. They had 3 years to be able to watch Jesus Christ and to see, and he evidenced all over the place that he never forced himself to be a king. Even though Jesus had every right to be the king, you have to look and realize he never, ever actually made a move to do so. He never nominated himself, and when he had opportunities to be able to step into a kingship because the people were clamoring for that, he didn't do it. When he did enter Jerusalem, and stop and think about this now, reflect on this. When he did enter into Jerusalem and he presented himself to the people, he never mentioned a thing about being king. He didn't say, "Hi, can I be king?" or "Hi, I'm here to be king." He didn't do anything like that. The people were in a position to accept him as king, but their change of heart later on, of course, indicated that that it was never going to be sincere, that they did not have a sincere offer there. Even now, when Christ becomes king of our heart, stop and think about that. It's because of our request to be saved, not because he forced himself on us. When you look all through the scriptures, God in his sovereignty, he could make things happen, and he did make some things happen, but he didn't force people to do anything. Look at Pharaoh. He never made Pharaoh let the people go. He made it worth Pharaoh's while to let the people go, but he did not force him to do that. And Pharaoh kept playing with that, but really all along the way. And that really, I think, should speak to us. That should speak to us about the whole sense of leadership that we have. Leadership is really more a question of inviting people to go along with you rather than browbeating them or ordering them and pulling rank on them. Okay, true leadership is done by example. I'm not going to turn to it, but if you ever look up 1 Peter chapter 5, when the Apostle Peter is writing about being an elder, he talks about doing it willingly, not by constraint, not because of forcing. That leadership is done by example, being an example to the people and leading by that way. That is the better way it's done. Now, in terms of management of a specific operation, that's a little bit different. Like, for instance, if we were installing ceiling tile in the church here, okay, then somebody's going to have to be directing, saying, "I need tile now, hand me up this, hand me up that." Yeah, that's a different thing. That's not a question of leadership. Okay, leadership is done by people willing to work with the person that's leading. Okay. Now, when Jesus does descend as king in his second coming, it's not going to be by popular acclaim. He's just going to do it then. He'll simply come in power as king, which he can do at any time. Okay, it's not that he can't do this thing. He has every right to do it, but generally speaking, through this portion of time, he doesn't force himself on anybody, although he, again, makes it very much worth their while. He will not need any process at all to make him king when he does come to do that. And I just think that's very interesting, especially when you stop to think. In the triumphal entry, he doesn't seek to be made king. In fact, when you look at it later on, Pilate's going to ask him about that. Okay, are you really the king? And he really does not even then force himself and try to claim power as a king. Okay, question 815. Besides not being able to catch Jesus in his own words, What other pressure should have been a clue that what they were doing was not right? And this is going to be based on Matthew 26:5. But they said, not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar among the people. So the answer is, it is B, the masses of people who would reject what they were doing if they worked openly and transparently. And I'll be saying this a little bit later on also, but you want to remember that the, let's see if it says here. Okay. Yeah, it's going to come up in another lesson. Let me see if it's today or not. Okay. Passover was really a question of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The Feast of Unleavened Bread is 8 days long. I'm going to be mentioning this later on. Passover feast itself was only one night. So you had the day before, when I go to talk about the getting the upper room or getting the room for the Last Supper, okay, that's not going to be the Passover meal itself. It's part of the overall Passover, but the Passover meal was actually like the second day into the affair, not the first day. Not the first day. Okay, because they had the preparation. But we'll get to that as we go along here. So this also goes to the issue of what's happening is, as far as timing is concerned, is that Jesus is getting together with them that night. Passover has started, but the actual Passover feast is not going to be for another day. Okay, so they said, not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar among the people. Looking at A and C, the wrong answers together. What should have been a clue? The army that Jesus put together, which would have protected him, or the Roman army was protecting Jesus? Well, there are no armies either way. Neither like Herod had the Roman army to bolster him and to back him up as king. No, nor a rebel army that Jesus had gotten. Jesus did not have a lack of standing, which required him to be propped up artificially, in this case by military force. Military force is not the only means to sustain a system that would collapse on itself if it had to stand on its own. In our modern times, it's evident that there is an informal conspiracy by those who have insinuated themselves into the media and academia. You don't have to have a military coup to back you up. You can just get people who are like the gatekeepers in the media, gatekeepers in academia. Business might be included in this also, except that businesses, they sort of go along with stuff just because they're trying to make a profit. Okay, that's typically more. They're less sincere about things. I think of how Colin Kaepernick went and did his thing for Nike shoes and everything, and he had all his stances. Yeah, Nike backed him up. They made millions of dollars off of that. They're not really so interested in the woke stuff. What they're interested in is just going along with whatever. Somebody was just telling me about how they were talking about the problem of China being so in bed with Hollywood and the entertainment industry. And it's really this question. It's not a question that they're really so much Marxists or anti-America. They're just pro. Hey, this is how I can make money. That's how I got to do it. Brother Joe, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that there's a lot of allegations against Nike using sweatshops for their products anyway.
Yeah, right.
So that just makes everything even more hypocritical than it would appear.
Sports and media hypocrisy is never ending. Okay, so B, the masses of people would reject what they were doing if they worked openly and transparently. Convincing the masses is not impossible to do, because it's not that the masses always intuitively know what is right. We hope for America that the American people, well, maybe that there's still enough momentum and tidal forces in America to stand up to whatever, but you can have a whole nation won over. The tidal force of the masses was something the leaders knew was against them in that moment. So forcing to work behind the scenes, they were forced to work behind the scenes as conspirators must do. Okay, in fact, I was just reading one article, and they had an interesting quote from George Orwell of the book 1984 fame, and he was writing, I guess it was in the 40s and 50s, really, and he was talking about Hitler. I think he might have been talking concurrently with what was going on. I can't remember, and he was talking about how that people naturally sort of want some kind of power and things like that to impress them, that even though capitalism and Marxism tried to appeal to the sense of people's needs, what people really, they seem to be wanting to be happy with and peace with those things. What they really want is somebody to force themselves on them and make things work. And so what you had in whether it was Hitler, and then this was being applied to what's going on in Russia and other areas, is people, really just appealing to the military and the force and power to make things happen. Of course, things are not quite going out that way. We're praying for the Ukrainian Christians, especially during this time, to be able to minister to people and for this to have some kind of spiritual impact on the Ukraine. But we're yet to see how that works out. So it's not that people are going to intuitively know what's right to do. They can be convinced, but at this point, the masses would have gone against what the leaders were saying. Section 145, Judas conspires with the chief priests. Now, I have a reference that I've sort of updated in the newer editions of the book, but the Matthew 26, 6-13, and Mark 14, 3-9 deal with Mary anointing Jesus. And if you're reading through the scriptures and going straight through, Matthew and Mark make it look like this feast where Mary anoints Jesus is happening right before before Judas going to conspire with the priests. No, it actually happens 6 days before. John 12, 1-11 has the proper placement of the timing of Mary, and this is actually 6 days before the Passover. So Matthew and Mark, they sort of pull it out of its context for the sake of comparing Judas's attitude. Okay, let me see. And the Mary anointing Jesus section is dealt with on page 211 in our books. Okay, question 816 concerning this conspiracy of Judas. You read John 17:12, and the question is, how was Satan able to so easily influence Judas Iscariot? John 17:12 says, when I was with them in the world, I kept them in thy name. Those that gavest me, I have kept. None of them is lost, but the son of perdition, that the scripture might be fulfilled. And then Luke 22:3 says, then entered Satan into Judas, surnamed Iscariot, being of the number of the 12. So the answer is, how was Satan able to influence him? Because what? Simply because he was not saved. He was not saved. Satan can't enter a believer. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. You've got the Holy Spirit in you. Okay, so a Christian cannot be demon possessed. Very contrary to, I was looking up a church that somebody was referring to the other day and trying to get some information on them. And the church was very proud of all their campus churches and all the numbers of people. They had a record of all the numbers, and they had Enjoy Ministry with John Maxwell, which is a pretty good ministry that did their auditing and proved that they were the fastest growing church of the 10,000 that they were auditing. And I couldn't find a thing about a statement of faith on the church at all. What do you believe? Nowhere. I mean, you saw numerous pages that they had that you could link to, how many people they had. in all the places around the country and all their watch parties and things like that, but no doctrinal statement. And then I thought, well, okay, let me see one of their sermons there. So I went to click on it, and on their YouTube channel, I had right the first thing up there, their sample service, how that you can watch the worship leader actually get delivered of a demon in their second service. So I went to watch and see this guy get delivered of a demon. And the preacher was preaching about deliverance and deliverance and deliverance, and lo and behold, there at the end of the thing, the worship leader is there crying on the platform, and they're saying, look, here it's happening right now, and they were delivering him of a demon. Yeah, no. If you are saved, no, you're not going to be, you can be oppressed, okay? There's such things as demonic oppression, but not possession. So the reason that he could do this is simply because he's not saved. He's not saved. Looking at the wrong answers, B, he was trying to help Jesus fulfill his mission to be king and wanted to bring the confrontation with the Jewish leadership to a head. Okay, this actually is a teaching that's out there. It's an actual argument that has been suggested, but it is purely speculative. The idea is that they would suggest that Judas was getting frustrated with how Christ was not presenting himself as king, that there was the movement of zealots of zealotry in Israel at the time, but that Judas was like, okay, you're not presenting yourself, okay, so I'm going to try to force it. If I go to betray you, then you're going to stand up and take your rightful place. Well, interesting for making a novel today, I guess, but no, that's not the case. Okay, for C, he had not been attending much time with Jesus. He had not been attending much time with Jesus. Well, C highlights how exasperating the betrayal by Judas was because he had spent so much intimate time with Jesus. It's often pointed out how that there were those from Jesus' hometown who knew him better and yet rejected him. And this reminds us that no matter how much we work with people, that we should not feel so much like a failure because Jesus himself was rejected by those who knew him best. There's no guarantee that anybody is going to get saved if they just knew more or if we presented the gospel any better. If that is the case with people from his hometown, how much more so in the case of Judas Iscariot? Judas was handpicked by Jesus. He had private tutoring with him. The fact of the matter is that anyone at any time can exercise their free will to reject Jesus Christ. So spending time and by application, us spending time with people, no, it's not our failure, it's their failure to receive. So Judas Iscariot, he was just simply not saved. In John 17:12, uses the same basic word for lost and perdition, comes from the word apollyon, to affirm that that Judas was not a believer. Okay, question 817. Sorry, Brother Joe. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I don't remember which one it was, but it's one of the classic movies that would have been about the life of Jesus. I don't know if it was the greatest story ever told or something similar. I know that there are a few of those kind of movies, but I do remember having heard what you were just talking about, how... Now, would Judas have, if he were actually pushing to have Jesus proclaim himself king, would he have been possibly associated with the zealots of that time? And possibly been trying to get that movement going? Because I do remember watching a scene, I didn't watch the whole film, but I remember catching a clip, and in one of the scenes, it wasn't like a scriptural scene, it was just kind of a move the story along type of scene. And it seemed like Judas was frustrated that Jesus wasn't like, getting his thing going and being the leader that he expected him to be. So I said, wait a minute, I'd heard that before. That sounds like they're kind of giving into that theory that, that's what Judas was all about. He's trying to, push for Jesus to take the throne. And I said, oh, that
they were setting it up for for being part of the argumentation that people would have out there in the world. Yeah.
I guess, but I mean, I just remember. I do remember seeing that, and one of the movies that we would, that would have been made by, I guess they were Hollywood movies, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't remember enough of the argument off the top of my head. I'm just speaking off the top of my head about that. But if you look it up, I think there's supposed to be some kind of case that's made for that. However, there's really only one of the disciples, one of the apostles, that was known as a zealot. Anybody remember who that was? Simon Zelotes. Yeah, that's where. Yeah, it looks like, what's zealots? You're reading, what's zealots? Yeah, he's a converted zealot. The party of the zealots. Yes, sir.
Judas was really prophesied to be a traitor, so he has never been saved, but he acted like he was, because he even joined in the when Jesus commanded them to go 2 by 2.
Yeah.
He must have been paired with somebody among the 12,
Yeah.
and they would have been also doing miracles, because they had the power to do miracles. Now, there's no mention of Judas participating in those. Maybe just sharing the gospel.
There's no mention that any of them were specifically which ones were doing miracles.
Correct.
Yeah. So really, it could have been that on Judas's team, when his partner, maybe the partner did all the miracles, but it wouldn't. You would not be prohibited from being able to do miracles. God could enable
fake
Judas to do it.
Fake counterfeit miracles.
Oh no, they could have been genuine miracles. Remember, God used Balaam's ass in order to perform a miracle and speak and do whatever. There's nothing really prohibiting it. It's just that he was not saved himself.
He was not there because he was an empty. Like Jesus said, if a house is empty, you think the enemy will not enter it.
Yeah.
And maybe.
Well, that would be in the case of demon possession only, though.
Yeah.
But now, and this is going to be a significant point later on. In the Psalms, yes, it was prophesied that one would lift up his heel against him. It's true, but that his familiar friend. However, we're going to find as we go along that it didn't have to be Judas. It did not have to be him. Now, it's like, yeah, it didn't have to be him. It just was him. And Jesus knew who it was and who it was going to be. But we're going to see this in the language of Christ, in the language that's used later on, that he had, boy, if there was ever somebody who had an opportunity to get saved and blew it, it would be Judas Iscariot, because he could, even up to just before the betrayal, he could have gotten saved. He could have repented of that.
Jesus called him friend.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so that was it. Jesus really loved him too, and he wanted him to repent, but he didn't. He just hung himself.
Yeah, and that key phrase, he did it himself. He hung himself. That is it. He did it to himself. Okay, that's going to be interesting when we get up to that section. Okay. Let's see. Question 817. How would Judas be a help to the Jewish leaders to bring Jesus down? At Luke 22:6, and he promised and sought opportunity to betray unto them in the absence of the multitude. And so the answer is B. He would betray or deliver him to the Roman authorities, which, this you won't get from the scripture, but you get from a Jewish understanding, from background information. That would actually require him to be a witness against Christ. It would require him to be a witness against Christ. Okay, so let's look at A first. He would identify him. Well, Jesus did not have to be identified for the Jewish leaders. They knew who he was. If that was all that was necessary, then Judas' guilt might not have been quite as significant, but it was significant. Okay, B and C together. He would deny Jesus when came time to bear testimony for him. Well, denying Jesus is certainly a way to betray Christ. Peter betrayed him by denying him 3 times. In Judas' case, his identifying Jesus to the authorities would not be sufficient. He would also have to be willing to bear testimony against Jesus. And this is where you can look in the Pentecost book, section 154, and that has an interesting discussion about that. But Judas, he didn't end up giving testimony, did he? We don't see him giving testimony, which is part of the unjust trial that Jesus had. His accuser wasn't even there to bear witness. They had to get false witnesses against him. There was much deliberation that went into Judas' betrayal, from being willing to witness against Jesus to the timing of doing this when nobody was around. So sin, I always tell people, sin is deliberate. All sin is deliberate. Not much deliberation sometimes, but nobody sins accidentally. Might not be very thoughtful, but it's not accidental. Choices are made whenever sin is around. I didn't mean to do it. Yeah, you did. Okay? You just denied it to yourself, or you didn't think much about it, or you were careless, or you didn't think about the consequences enough. The fact of the matter is, you did mean to do it. You did mean to do it. Okay, question 818. Why did Judas conspire to do this discreetly, not out in the open? And that's going to be verse 6 again. He promised and sought opportunity to betray him unto them in the absence of the multitude. So the answer is, he was afraid with the leaders of how popular Jesus was and how they would react. So he promised it to them. And then Mark 14:11 says, when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money, and he sought how he might conveniently betray him. So they were all of one mind there. So he would share in the fear of the multitude. Okay, so Mark points out how the leaders in Judas were concerned about the convenience of the betrayal, and recognizing the multitudes could be a problem. He wanted to surprise everybody. Well, Jesus was trying to avoid the surprise. Judas was trying to avoid the surprise. This would cause okay, let me do this again. He was trying to avoid the surprise that this would cause, and he was not concerned about any embarrassment, as in B, to Jesus Christ, which detracts from any sense that he was concerned about forcing Christ to take action as a king. Okay, if he was trying to do this in the absence of the multitude, then he's sort of trying to not present him as king, not rally the people to him as king. Okay. Well, that brings us to the end of that section there. Is there anybody has anything they'd like to share? Any questions? Yes, Brother Tone.
I'm not sure whether the timing, but I think Jesus identified himself already even before Judas came over to kiss him. And in fact, the proof of him identifying himself was those that were seeking him were thrown to the ground. Just like that's a recognition of his God being part of the Godhead, Pastor.
Yeah, and in fact, I thought you were going to refer to something even a little bit before that. He identifies, and Judas identifies himself as the betrayer. That'll be an interesting point in one of the, I think on Thursday evening we're going to be getting into, which goes to the issue of how generous Jesus was to give him, I mean, really way above and beyond. I remember one time, I had, in fact, 2 times I sat on a jury, and I had the same judge both times, and I was quite impressed with the way the judicial system worked at the time. I mean, we hear a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of stuff to fuss about, and I would say also that really when we hear about some cases and how bad they go, it is good sometimes to go and read about some of these things, and you say, yeah, okay, well, that judge looked like they gave a bad decision, but, I can see why. You can see that happen sometimes. But the point was that the judge was that way. And when I went on the second jury, the judge, I think, asked questions, and my answer revealed that I'd been in the court before, and They asked, well, how did I do? And I said, it was wonderful. It was a wonderful job. I was happy to say that. But I watched as they, not in some loose way like we keep hearing about, but not in any loose way giving the defendant slack, but it was very appropriate. And I had to say that defendant had every fair thing that was done for them. There was nothing unfair about the trial, and he was guilty. He was found guilty. And the point being that Jesus did everything possible for Judas, even though he was the son of perdition. Still, that guy had every chance, which that makes us all the sadder, which will be a piece of another lesson coming up too.